That's what I was hoping for. What's up guys, First Night here, and login authentication didn't really go as planned. I thought I was going to be able to pump out this video to you guys within a week of starting my app, which means, of course, I was going to incorporate Facebook, Twitter, Google, and then regular email login authentication into my application within that 1 week. But that didn't really pan out because, well, to be honest with you guys, my very first Xcode project, I scrapped the whole entire thing. After I created my UI, after I imported Firebase, I created I connected Firebase in my app, and I imported a Facebook SDK, I imported Google SDK in order to incorporate those. I just scrapped it because I don't know why. The constraints were fine, but the UI wasn't working right, as you guys saw at the beginning of this video. And it was like the Google SDK wasn't being imported, although my pod file said it was, and even when I did pod install, it showed that it was imported. It's like the line of code that said import Google sign-in wasn't there because I was getting all these errors for the code that I wrote that had to do with that it needed that the import Google sign-in line in order to work. I needed the SDK, but it just didn't. It was just giving me errors. And I don't know if that was because I tried to do Facebook authentication first and didn't complete it. I don't know what the whole case was, and the reason behind me not completing the Facebook login authentication was because I don't have a Facebook account, so I need to create one in order to access Facebook for developers. When I did that, Facebook for developers wanted me to verify myself. I tried to verify myself, and then they never got back to me. So I would have had to create a whole new Facebook. So I just decided to go ahead and go with Google authentication. So before scrapping that Xcode project, I copied my user interface because I didn't want to create that whole entire thing again. Although I was kind of messing up with the constraints, I imported that into a new Xcode project and it worked just fine. I had to add like 1 or 2 constraints because those didn't follow it, but it still worked fine. I don't know what was wrong with the one before, and mind you, I'm on Xcode 8, the final updated Xcode 8 as of this time. I'm not on Xcode 9 beta. I would understand if it was a beta version to get errors, but that wasn't the problem with me. I don't know what the case was, but I created a new project and it went away. So what I did after that is, of course, I imported my Firebase. So I had to connect those two. And then I forgot Facebook because Facebook developers never really got back to me. Although I know I could have created a new email account or a new email account and then a new Facebook account with that email. I just didn't do it. So I imported the Google SDK and I followed the documentation that Firebase provides you for incorporating Google sign-in to your iOS application using Firebase, of course. And I started following that along with some other videos and whatnot, because although it seems laid out, step 1, step 2, step 3 in the Firebase documentation, it wasn't as easy as they made it out to be. And there's a few things, like in the documentation it said, have this line say Firebase app.config, but it was really FIRapp.config. And there are just a few things like that where the code didn't actually translate exactly over to the Xcode code. So what I did was I looked at a few videos and that kind of helped me out. But in order to better explain this, let me throw myself down in this little bubble right here or here, and then I'm going to show you guys my code. So let me get the computer and show you guys the code. First, we're going to look at the main Dot Storyboard. So as you can see, it's a little bit different than the simulator. Let's look at the simulator. We have white text here for your name, email, and password. We also have the Google sign-in button. And your name, email, password right here, as you can see, isn't white. In order to do that, what I did was I came over to, what inspector is this? This is the identity inspector. Let me actually select this. And I added in this key path type and value. So user-defined runtime attributes. I made it, when it's during runtime, which is the simulator, I made it white. And of course, since that's the actual placeholder text, I'm going to change that to a more clear or grayish type of text. And then once someone starts typing in that text field, it's going to be white. But I just incorporated that so I could see it. I wanted it to be aligned. And this isn't my final UI for the login screen, but it's what I have for now. And then as for the Google sign-in button, we'll have to come over to our view controller, which I know this up here, let me click off. Well, this is called a view controller, class view controller, viewcontroller.swift, and then class view controller here. I'm going to change those names to something like login screen or just login.swift, and class is going to be called login or sign up or whatever screen that was, because view controller doesn't describe it well, and I'm going to have quite a few different view controllers, so I need to make sure each one is named properly. But in order to incorporate the Google button, I threw in this code right here, and as you can see, it's marked by comment because comments are your friend. Add Google Login button. So I threw this in and I set my own X, Y, width, and height value in order to get it at this location and at this width and at this height. Although I don't think this is 50 tall. I don't know why that's the case, but it is. And in order for this code to work, this line of code right here, import Google sign-in, imports the SDK that I already saved into my pod file. And this line 11 wasn't working or wasn't reading this line in my first Xcode project, and that was like a big problem. I don't know what the case was there, but it didn't work. So I just scrapped it, and here we are now. And within my class view controller, which will be named Login soon, I added in GID, which stands for a Google ID, sign in UI delegate in order to make everything work. So it kind of works as a hierarchy. I need to import Google sign in for GID sign in UI delegate to work, and I need to incorporate GID sign in UI delegate in order to allow this code to work. So you just have to make sure you have each step. If I were to add this code in first without having this or this, it'll show an error. For example, let me save it. And as you can see, I have all of these errors, and that's because this was deleted, but let's put it back in. These errors may still be there for a second until it loads up. I saved it, so it should, yep, there it goes. And what I did was I incorporated this snippet of code right here into a file private function called setup Google buttons, and then ran setup Google buttons in viewDidLoad function. So I did that because otherwise, imagine if I had 20 of these different types of deals. So if I had 20 buttons, because after you can create your whole entire user interface in your view controller. So if I have all these different buttons that need to, be in their own function, it would kind of be not very clean if all of that was inside viewDidLoad by itself. So I threw that into its own file private function, and I threw that file private function name into viewDidLoad in order to make it work. So that's why it's set up like that. So all this code runs when the view loads. And speaking of view loading, that's when this comes in. And let me show you right here what happens when I click this Google sign in button. So as you can see, when the button is clicked, it takes us over to basically the Google website. It makes us enter our email, it makes us enter our password, and then we're able to, that way we're logged into our application. And right now it's going to take us back to the same exact screen because, well, we don't have any other screens. But in other words, if it was your first time logging into a real application, it would take you into the actual application because you're logged in at that point. But right now, we don't have that happen because I'm already logged in. And what does happen is, let me pull this up. Let me make this a little bit bigger, is this. I clicked it quite a few times. Yeah, I know. But I have code that reads us successfully logged in. Wait, yeah, here we go. Successfully logged into Google. And then we make sure we're successfully logged in to Firebase with Google. So it logs into Google first, and then it talks to the Firebase, the backend, to make sure that everything is working properly and that we store that login into Firebase. Otherwise, you wouldn't really have a profile. That's the point of using Firebase as a backend. Let's close that back up and let me show you what I'm talking about. Down here, where are we at? So as you can see, if we failed to log in, typed in wrong information, this is what we would get. But since we didn't type in wrong information, this is what we got. Successfully logged into Google. And then same thing goes for when it checks back, you logging in checks back to store it into Firebase. If something's wrong, it's going to say failed to create a Firebase user with Google account, and then it's going to say the error. Well, it's going to say essentially the Google account. And then successfully logged into Firebase with Google is what appears, and it has a user ID, is what appears when, well, you successfully log in. And all of this code is only possible because we incorporated GID sign-in delegate, not UI delegate because this isn't a view controller. And this is only working because we imported Google sign-in. So that plays back to, in our pod file, and importing our SDK. So pod install imports the Google SDK, and that's what allows us to import the Google sign-in application, and then we're able to throw in all of our proper code in order to incorporate this little button right here. All of this is for this little button and to create yourself as a user. And this is a little line of code I was talking about earlier for app.configure. It used to say on the documentation, it said Firebase. Let me show you, Firebase app. And that doesn't work. As you can see, it's not green. It'll give us an error in a little bit if I don't change it. But let me change it back. There we go. And that was a problem. Not necessarily the problem, but that's a problem with the Firebase documentation, is that it's not up to date, I guess. I don't know what the case is, but just remember that if you're going to incorporate Google Sign-In or any of those, to make sure it's FIR app.configure. And when I say that it's the Firebase Google Sign-In documentation, of course, when you incorporate Sign-In to begin with, it also says firebase.configure, but you want to make sure it's FIR app.configure. And then it also says Firebase for app down here. You have to make sure that's consistent with what works up here. All right, and going into detail, a little bit of detail when it comes to this code down here. So as you can see, guardlet, we have ID token, we have access token, and we have credentials. You can read more about this on that documentation I've been talking about. But basically what this is doing is just checking through everything. We're checking through to make sure that Google, the sign-in works for Google. And then down here is what we're doing is making sure everything works from Google into Firebase, like I've mentioned plenty of times, because that's the process. You have the button, takes you to Google. You log into Google, Google makes sure it's good. And after you log in, Google or Firebase makes sure that that Google profile is good and not created before, and so it's not already in the database. And if it's good to go, then it'll be successfully logged in, and it'll create a new user if that's your initial login. So that's kind of how this works. That's how it would work with Facebook. That's how it would work with Twitter. That's even how it would work with regular email login, to make sure you're not already a user and it creates you a new user ID if that's the case. And as for login authentication, that's it for now. And I do have a few videos in the works that aren't exactly documenting my iOS development journey, but it is things that I've either talked about on this channel before. I have a tiny house kind of video update coming on because I have a lot of people asking me I've mentioned tiny house, being a tiny house before, and a lot of people are asking me about it, so I'm going to make a video addressing that. And then my next iOS development journey will be incorporating the next thing, which I think maybe a profile? I don't know yet though. So I'm going to get developing on that this week, and I'll let you guys know, of course, whether it's on, I'll let you guys know on Instagram. So follow me on Instagram. You'll see the little end screen thing, or link is down in the description below, and you'll be able to kind of keep up to date with what I'm doing on a daily basis and see what this next video is going to be about. But until then, I'm going to throw out a few of these other videos, like the tiny house one, and then a few other ones that have to do with iOS development and the iPhone. But that's it for now. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave them down below, right below that, like button, and be sure to share this with any friends that you think are interested in iOS development. And well, until next time, have a good one.